Greetings, Africa and its mighty, mighty diaspora. This is the X-Man coming straight at you, 10 toes down, hoodie pulled tight, and my heart's locked in. From the streets of Chicago to the streets of Lagos to the streets of London to the streets of Kampala, today we got fire in the hole. What I'm about to lay out ain't pretty, it ain't comfortable, but it's the truth, raw and unfiltered, like it always is when the X-Man takes the mic. Today, we're going deep into Japan's so-called African hometown deal and the madness that erupted around it. But make no mistake, this ain't just about Japan. This is about the centuries-long war on African people across the globe. It's about the pattern of racism, xenophobia, and hate that has stalked us from slavery to colonialism, from Jim Crow to George Floyd, from Congo to Brazil, from the streets of Paris to the ghettos of Chicago, from the sugar plantations of the Caribbean to the cocoa plantations of Ivory Coast. Everywhere you look, Black life has been treated as disposable, and this latest fiasco in Japan is just another chapter in a book we've been forced to read for 500 years. Let's break it down. Japan, trying to flex its soft power at a summit they call TICAD, the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, decided it would roll out this shiny new project called the African Hometown Initiative. Now, on the surface, this thing was supposed to be about cultural exchange. Bring some African students, bring some African workers, link up small Japanese towns with African countries, do some cultural events, some school partnerships. Japan, with its aging population and shrinking workforce, wanted some fresh energy. Africa, with its youthful population, was supposed to be the source. Sounds harmless, right? But the problem, family, is deeper than that. First, the Nigerian government, always desperate to come home with a trophy, even if it's fake, ran ahead of the truth. They put out a press release saying Japan was offering special visas to Nigerians, that Nigerians would be able to move, work, and live in Japan as part of this deal. A straight up lie. And the worst part, Nigerians celebrated it. Why? Because the economy back home is so crushed under bad governance, corruption, and IMF slavery that our brightest youth are itching to Japa, to escape. So instead of fixing the mess in Abuja, Nigeria's puppet government offered its citizens a pipe dream, salvation in Japan. And who's sitting in that seat in Abuja? A man who ain't nothing but a CIA asset, a Western puppet dressed in Agbada, dancing to the same old colonial tune. Then Tanzania piled on with a mistranslation in their media saying Japan dedicated a whole city to Tanzania. That word dedicated flipped back into Japanese as sacrifice. Suddenly, the Japanese people thought their government was sacrificing cities to Africans. Fake news lit the match, and the Japanese internet threw gasoline on it. Suddenly, you had protests in the streets, angry phone calls jamming city hall phone lines, racist rants online about how Africans were going to invade Japan, bring crime, destroy culture, Google Maps vandalism, where Japanese city halls were renamed Nigeria City Hall and Ghana City Hall. Ugly, disgusting, straight up racist backlash. Now, pause for a second and let's ask the bigger question. Why is it that no matter where Africans go, we are greeted with hate? Why is it that our very presence makes nations panic? From America's slave plantations to Jim Crow to the Tulsa massacre when thriving Black Wall Street was bombed and burned to the ground, to apartheid South Africa, where people were jailed and unalived for daring to demand dignity, to France, where Africans are called monkeys while being exploited, to Ukraine, where African students fleeing war were pushed off trains so white Ukrainians could ride, to China, where during COVID, Africans were scapegoated, kicked out of apartments, and denied hospital treatment, even to Argentina, where the Black population was intentionally erased by being sent to die on the front lines of war in the 1800s. Family, this is not coincidence. This is a pattern This is global anti-Blackness. This is the world telling us over and over again that they want our labor, our talent, our resources, but not our lives. And yet, despite this history, what do our so-called African leaders do? They put on their best suits, they fly business class to Tokyo, and they sit like obedient school children in front of Japanese officials, the World Bank, the UN, and the EU, institutions where Africa doesn't even have a veto, where we don't have real power, where our yearly African Union budget is 66% funded by outsiders. These presidents are supposed to be leaders of sovereign nations, yet they act like students at detention, begging for permission slips. Nigeria's puppet president even had the nerve to try and spin fake news as a victory, selling lies to his people instead of facing the truth of his failed leadership. And Zambia, let's not forget Zambia, following right behind, leading their people astray into the arms of neocolonial masters. Meanwhile, Japan tried to play itself off as the quality partner, saying, "We're not like China. We don't just build infrastructure, we build relationships." And to prove it, they dropped a $5.5 billion investment pledge for Africa. But tell me this, what good is $5.5 billion when your people at home are spitting racist venom at the very thought of Africans in their neighborhoods? What good is a deal when it's built on lies, mistranslations, and fear? Japan scored an own goal on the world stage. Instead of headlines about partnership and progress, the world saw Japan's racism on display. Instead of looking like a trustworthy partner, Japan looked hypocritical. And let's not pretend China, Russia, and every rival took notes, ready to use this as proof that Japan's soft power is a weak mask over deep xenophobia. But, brothers and sisters, here's the raw truth. This whole mess tells us one thing. We can't keep looking outside Africa for salvation. Japan ain't our savior. America ain't our savior. Europe ain't our savior. They've all had centuries to prove otherwise, and the evidence is clear. If you think salvation is going to come from Tokyo, Brussels, Paris, Washington, or London, you're playing yourself. The only salvation for Africa is Africa. Look at Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Look at the AES alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, nations standing up, kicking out French troops, reclaiming their gold, launching African-made electric cars, telling the IMF and World Bank to take a hike. Traoré didn't run to Japan to beg for visas. He told his people, "We build here, we plant here, we rise here." That is the example. That is the blueprint. The AES is showing Africa what it looks like when leaders stop acting like puppets and start acting like lions. And family, let's not forget the history of betrayal. From King Leopold cutting off Congolese hands for rubber quotas, while Belgian candy shops still sell chocolate hands today as if genocide is a joke, to the assassinations of Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Muammar Gaddafi, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr., to coups funded by the CIA, to puppet presidents installed by France, to IMF loans designed to keep Africa in permanent debt. This is the history of foreign involvement in Africa. And still today, our leaders, bought and sold like cattle, run to summits in Europe and Asia to sit at the feet of their masters. Hold up. Now, if this message is hitting your chest like a djembe drum like it should, then smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with everyone on your social media platforms. Share it with your mama, your pops, your uncles and aunties, and all of your cousins, because this ain't entertainment. This ain't TikTok or Netflix. This is Africa's revolution, and Africa needs all hands on deck. And this is the way that you can get involved, by sharing this video like your life depends on it, because it does. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, the truth. So here's the truth. Japan didn't just expose itself. Nigeria's government exposed itself too. When you run home bragging about fake visas, When you tell your people salvation is overseas instead of at home, you are admitting failure. You're admitting you cannot create jobs, you cannot provide security, you cannot govern. Nigeria, with all its oil, all its gas, all its people, still sending youth overseas to look for scraps. Meanwhile, AES nations with fewer resources are showing that sovereignty is possible. Nigeria's president is nothing but a CIA asset, a man who answers to Washington before he answers to Abuja. And as long as these puppets sit in power, Africans will be lied to, led astray, and betrayed. Family, we got to wake up. We can't keep falling for the hype. $5.5 billion from Japan ain't liberation. It's hush money. Special visas ain't liberation. They're escape hatches for the lucky few while millions are left behind. Cultural exchange ain't liberation when the culture on the other side is telling you, stay out, you're not welcome. Liberation comes from Pan-African unity. Liberation comes from building at home. Liberation comes from leaders like Traoré, from alliances like AES, from reclaiming our gold, our oil, our land, our future. Liberation comes when Africa stops sending its children to the slaughter abroad and starts building empires at home. And let me be clear, the racism we saw in Japan is no different than the racism we've seen everywhere else. America enslaved us, then Jim Crowed us, then unalived George Floyd in the streets. Brazil imported millions of Africans for slavery, then erased our descendants from history. Argentina intentionally wiped out its black population by sending them to war. Europe colonized us, cut us up in Berlin like pieces of cake, then still has the audacity to lecture Africa about democracy. France still controls African currencies today through the CFA franc. China scapegoated Africans during COVID. Belgium still sells chocolate hands. And now Japan, with its polite bow and its promises, shows its people can't even handle the idea of Africans living next door. This is the global system we live in. And until Africa unites, until Africa rises, this is the madness we will continue to face. So here's the X-Man's message to Africa and its mighty diaspora. Stop begging, stop running, stop looking outside for validation. Build here, plant here, fight here. If Captain Traoré can stand against France, if Burkina Faso can roll out African-made cars, if Mali and Niger can reclaim their gold, then what excuse does Nigeria have with all its oil and gas? What excuse does South Africa have with all its minerals? What excuse does Congo have sitting on 70% of the world's cobalt? We have no excuses left. It's time to stand up or shut up. No sellouts, no filters, no fear. This is the X-Man signing off.